The whispers swept through the church like wildfire on a summer prairie as Eleanor Holcomb stood frozen at the altar, her ivory wedding dress gleaming in the late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the stained glass windows. The letter clutched in her trembling hands had been delivered moments before she was to say her vows, the cruel words blurring before her tear-filled eyes. "I cannot go through with this. Forgive me." No signature, no explanation, just 12 words that shattered her world before the entire population of Concordia, Kansas, in the spring of 1875. Eleanor's chest tightened as she struggled to breathe, the weight of 300 pairs of eyes bearing down upon her. Thomas Blackburn, her fiancé of 8 months, was nowhere to be seen. The murmurs grew louder, pitying, scandalized, amused as the truth became undeniable. She had been abandoned at the altar. "Poor dear," someone whispered. "Always thought she was reaching above her station with that railroad man." Eleanor's mother began to sob, while her father's face darkened with rage. The pastor cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly at a loss. The church that had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbons for what should have been the most beautiful day of her life now felt like a prison of humiliation. Just as Eleanor turned to flee, a man rose from the back pew. Jacob West, tall, broad-shouldered, his usually unruly dark hair combed back for the occasion, though a rebellious lock had fallen across his forehead. His blue eyes, always so guarded, now held something Eleanor couldn't quite name. He stepped into the aisle, removing his hat as he walked deliberately toward the altar. Eleanor had known Jacob for years, the quiet, serious rancher who lived on the outskirts of town, more comfortable with horses than people. He'd been invited as a courtesy, being her father's occasional business associate. They'd exchanged perhaps a dozen words in all the years she'd known him. Jacob stopped before her, his gaze unwavering. The church fell silent. "Miss Holcomb," he said, his voice low enough that only those nearest could hear. "I reckon you shouldn't have to bear this alone." He extended his hand, calloused, strong, steady. "If you'll have me, I'm offering to stand in his place." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand, her mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. The whispers had ceased. The entire congregation seemed to be holding its breath. "Mr. West," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You can't possibly mean—" "I do," he said simply. "It's not right what's been done to you today. I'm offering a way out for both of us." Eleanor looked into his eyes, searching for mockery or pity, but finding neither. Instead, she saw determination, honesty, and something else, something that made her heart skip despite the circumstances. "Why?" she managed. His voice remained steady. "Because sometimes life offers unexpected paths when the one we plan disappears." He leaned closer. "I won't make you any grand promises of love, Miss Holcomb, but I will promise you respect, honesty, and a true partnership. That's more than some men offer even with flowery words." Eleanor's gaze darted to her parents, her mother's tear-streaked face, her father's look of desperate hope. Then to the congregation, where faces registered shock, curiosity, and in some cases, barely concealed glee at the drama unfolding. In that moment, Eleanor made a decision that would alter the course of her life. With trembling fingers, she placed her hand in Jacob's. "I accept," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. A collective gasp rippled through the church. The pastor blinked rapidly, fumbling with his Bible. "Are you certain, Miss Holcomb?" he asked. Eleanor looked at Jacob, this near stranger who had just offered her salvation from public humiliation. "Yes," she said, "I am." And so, with the sun streaming through the windows and the scent of lilacs filling the air, Eleanor Holcomb married Jacob West instead of Thomas Blackburn. The ceremony was brief, the traditional words somehow more solemn in the wake of the day's dramatic turn. When Jacob slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, he whispered. Eleanor felt a curious calm settle over her, replacing the panic and shame that had threatened to consume her moments before. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Eleanor saw a mixture of expressions: shock, disapproval, and in some faces, a grudging respect. Jacob offered his arm, and together they walked down the aisle and out into the spring sunshine, leaving behind the whispers and stares. The wedding reception, hastily adjusted to accommodate the change in groom, was a strained affair. Eleanor moved through it in a daze, accepting congratulations that sounded more like condolences. Jacob remained by her side, a solid, quiet presence, speaking only when necessary and keeping a respectful distance while still clearly establishing his position as her husband. As twilight descended, Jacob approached Eleanor where she stood speaking with her cousin. "Mrs. West," he said formally, "if you're ready, we should be heading home. It's a fair ride to the ranch." The reality of her situation struck Eleanor anew. She was going home with this man, this near stranger to his ranch outside of town. She would sleep under his roof tonight as his wife. The thought sent a tremor of uncertainty through her. "Of course," she managed, forcing a smile. "Let me just say goodbye to my parents." Her mother clung to her, whispering tearful advice and reassurances. Her father shook Jacob's hand with a firm grip. "You're a good man, West," he said gruffly. "Better than I knew," Jacob nodded. "I'll take care of her, sir. You have my word." The farewell to her parents was harder than Eleanor had anticipated. Despite being 22 years old and prepared to start her own household, she had expected to live much closer to town, to visit often. Jacob's ranch was nearly 10 miles out, not an impossible distance, but far enough to make casual visits difficult. As Jacob helped her into his wagon, Eleanor noticed that someone had tied tin cans and ribbons to the back, a traditional wedding prank that seemed almost cruelly normal given the circumstances. The townsfolk who remained called out good wishes that ranged from sincere to suggestive, causing color to rise in Eleanor's cheeks. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the rattling of the cans behind them. Eleanor stared at her hands, still wearing the white gloves that matched her wedding dress, now slightly smudged from the day's events. "I expect you have questions," Jacob finally said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Too many to know where to begin. Start anywhere you like. We have time." She turned to study his profile, strong jaw dusted with stubble, straight nose, those eyes that seemed to notice everything while revealing little. "Why did you do it, truly?" Jacob was silent for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was contemplative. "I've been on my own a long while, Mrs. West. My parents passed when I was 20, leaving me the ranch and not much else. I've built it up, made something of it these past 8 years. It's a good place, 500 acres, a sturdy house, decent cattle stock, but it's been solitary." He glanced at her briefly. "I've thought of taking a wife, but I'm not one for courtship and fancy talk. When I saw you standing there today, abandoned by a man not worth the ground you walk on, it seemed like perhaps fate had opened a door for both of us. So it was an impulse." Eleanor couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "A convenient opportunity," Jacob shook his head. "Not just that, no. I've admired you from afar, Mrs. West, your kindness to others, your spirit. The way you fought to start that school library last year when the town council said there wasn't money for books." He paused. "I'm not a romantic man, but I know quality when I see it." The simple compliment touched Eleanor more deeply than any of Thomas's poetic declarations ever had. "Still," she said softly, "marriage is a serious undertaking." "Yes," he agreed, "and I mean to honor it fully. I won't pretend this is conventional, but I believe we can build something worthwhile, if you're willing." Eleanor considered his words. She had spent months planning a future with Thomas, a future that had evaporated in an instant with his cowardly letter. Now she found herself married to a man she barely knew, heading to a home she'd never seen. "I don't know if I can be a proper wife to you," she admitted, her voice small. Jacob's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. We can take time to know each other. I have a spare room. It was my mother's sewing room. You can have your privacy there until you decide otherwise." Relief flooded through Eleanor, followed quickly by a different kind of nervousness. "What will people think?" A rare smile touched Jacob's lips. "People will think what they always do, whatever suits them best, but they need never know the private arrangements of our household." As the wagon crested a hill, Jacob reined the horses to a stop. There it is, he said quietly, West Haven Ranch. In the fading light, Eleanor could see a sprawling property in the valley below. A large two-story house sat nestled among cottonwood trees, with several outbuildings nearby. Fenced pastures stretched into the distance, and she could make out the shapes of cattle grazing in the twilight. A stream wound through the property, its surface catching the last golden rays of the setting sun. It was beautiful, far more impressive than she had imagined. "You built all this?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "Improved it," Jacob corrected. "My father started with just 50 acres and a one-room cabin. Each generation has added to it." He glanced at her. "Now it's our turn." The word "our" hung in the air between them, full of possibilities and uncertainties. As Jacob flicked the reins and the wagon began to descend toward the ranch, Eleanor felt a curious mixture of trepidation and hope. This was not the wedding day she had planned, not the life she had envisioned, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could become something meaningful. As they approached the house, a figure emerged onto the porch, an older woman with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. "That's Mrs. Caldwell," Jacob explained. "She's been housekeeper here since my mother's time. She lives in the small cottage beyond the barn. She's formidable but loyal to a fault." The woman shaded her eyes against the setting sun, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock as she registered Eleanor's white dress. "Mr. West," she called as the wagon drew closer. "What on earth, Mrs. Caldwell?" Jacob interrupted, bringing the wagon to a halt. "Allow me to introduce my wife, Eleanor West." The housekeeper's mouth fell open, but she recovered quickly. "Your wife, but I thought there's been a change of plans," Jacob said firmly. "Mrs. West will need help settling in." "I believe the blue bedroom is ready." "Of course it is. I keep all the rooms ready, don't I?" Mrs. Caldwell replied, rallying admirably despite her obvious confusion. She approached the wagon and offered Eleanor a work-roughened hand. "Welcome to West Haven, Mrs. West." "Quite a surprise you are, but a welcome one, I'm sure." Eleanor took the woman's hand, grateful for the attempt at normalcy. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. I'm sorry for the unexpected arrival. Life's full of surprises, isn't it?" the housekeeper said, giving Eleanor an appraising look. "Some better than others, I'd say." Jacob helped Eleanor down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she quickly stepped away, smoothing her wrinkled wedding dress. "I'll see to the horses," Jacob said. "Mrs. Caldwell will show you inside." As he led the team toward the barn, Eleanor found herself following the housekeeper up the porch steps and into what was now, apparently, her home. The interior of the house surprised her. She had expected a bachelor's Spartan quarters, but instead found a well-maintained home with solid, comfortable furnishings. The main room held a large stone fireplace, bookshelves lined with volumes, and chairs that looked inviting rather than merely functional. Oil lamps cast a warm glow over polished wood floors partially covered with colorful woven rugs. "Mr. West's mother had a good eye," Mrs. Caldwell explained, noticing Eleanor's expression. "He's kept things much as she left them, though he added the bookshelves himself. Man reads more than anyone I've known." She led Eleanor up a wide staircase to the second floor. "Master bedroom's there," she said, nodding toward a closed door at the end of the hall. "But Mr. West mentioned the blue room, so I expect that's where you'll be staying for now." The blue bedroom was lovely, airy, and feminine, with a large four-poster bed draped in blue and white quilts, matching curtains at the windows, and a dressing table with a mirror. A door in one wall presumably led to a closet. This was his mother's sewing room. Eleanor asked, running her hand over the polished wood of the dressing table. Mrs. Caldwell snorted. "Hardly. This was always a proper bedroom. His mother's sewing room was that little space downstairs off the kitchen." She fixed Eleanor with a penetrating gaze. "I don't know what's happened here today, Mrs. West, but I've known Jacob since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. He's a good man, the best. Whatever arrangement you two have come to, I hope you'll be kind to him." The woman's fierce loyalty touched Eleanor. "I have no intention of being anything else, Mrs. Caldwell. Today has been unexpected for us both." The housekeeper nodded, apparently satisfied. I'll bring up some hot water so you can freshen up. Are you hungry? There's stew keeping warm. Eleanor realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast, too nervous about the wedding to manage more than a few bites. Stew sounds wonderful, thank you. Left alone, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself a moment to absorb the enormity of the day's events. Tears that she had held back for hours finally spilled over. She wept for the future she had planned, for the public humiliation she had endured, and for the uncertainty that now lay before her. A soft knock at the door made her hurriedly wipe her eyes. Yes. Jacob stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing muscled forearms tanned from outdoor work. He held a small trunk. Your father sent this with one of his men, he explained. Said it has some of your things. The rest will come tomorrow. Thank you, Eleanor said, painfully aware of her tear-stained face. Jacob set the trunk down just inside the door, his gaze taking in the room. Is everything all right? Do you need anything else? It's a beautiful room, Eleanor said honestly. Mrs. Caldwell has been very kind, Jacob nodded. She's a good woman, tough as old boot leather but with a heart to match. He hesitated. I've put your things in the room across the hall. We'll take our meals together if that's agreeable, but otherwise your time is your own. Eleanor stood, finding her voice. Mr. West, Jacob, I want you to know that I'm grateful for what you did today. You saved me from, well, I can't imagine facing everyone if you hadn't stepped forward. A shadow crossed his face. No one deserves what was done to you today. Least of all someone like you. The simple statement, delivered without flattery or pretense, touched Eleanor deeply. Still, it was a great sacrifice on your part. Marrying a woman you hardly know. I know enough, he interrupted gently. The rest we'll learn in time. He cleared his throat. I should let you rest. It's been a long day. Mrs. Caldwell will bring up water for you to wash, and there's food when you're ready. He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Eleanor, he said, the first time he had used her given name, I meant what I said in the church. This may not be the marriage either of us planned, but I intend to honor it. You have my word on that. After he left, Eleanor opened the trunk her father had sent. Inside were a few changes of clothing, her hairbrush and toiletries, a framed photograph of her parents, and a book of poetry she had been reading. Simple necessities to get her through until the rest of her belongings could be delivered. As she changed out of her wedding dress, carefully folding the ivory satin and lace that had been meant for a very different day, Eleanor contemplated her situation. She was now Mrs. Eleanor West, mistress of a substantial ranch, married to a man who was virtually a stranger. It wasn't the life she had planned, but perhaps it could become a life worth living. Mrs. Caldwell brought up a pitcher of hot water and a basin, along with a bar of lavender-scented soap. Dinner's ready when you are, she said. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill the hollow spots. Refreshed from washing away the day's tears and tension, Eleanor made her way downstairs. She found Jacob in the dining room, standing as she entered. The table was set for two, with a tureen of stew, a loaf of fresh bread, and a pot of coffee. Feel better? He asked, pulling out a chair for her. Much, thank you, she replied, taking the offered seat. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the stew rich and flavorful, the bread still warm. Mrs. Caldwell is an excellent cook, Eleanor remarked. Jacob nodded. One of her many talents. She also terrorizes the ranch hands, keeps the accounts better than any banker, and knows more about breeding cattle than most men twice her age. Eleanor smiled her first genuine smile of the evening. She sounds remarkable. She is. Her husband worked this ranch with my father. After they both passed, she stayed on. Don't know what I'd have done without her these past years. As they continued eating, Jacob spoke of the ranch, 500 acres of good grazing land, a herd of nearly 300 cattle, 6 horses, and various other livestock. He employed 4 full-time ranch hands with additional help brought in during roundup and branding. It's not the biggest spread in the county, he said, but it's well managed and turning a profit. We've been lucky with the weather these past few years, and beef prices have been strong. Eleanor listened, asking questions that seemed to please him with their practicality. She had grown up on the periphery of the cattle business, her father being a merchant who supplied many of the ranchers in the area. "What about you?" Jacob asked as they finished their meal. "Your father mentioned you taught at the school for a time," Eleanor nodded. "For 2 years after finishing my own education, I enjoyed it very much." "Why did you stop?" A shadow crossed her face. "Thomas," she paused, finding it difficult to say his name. "My former fiancé felt it wouldn't be appropriate for his wife to work outside the home." Jacob's expression darkened. "Seems to me that teaching children is one of the most important jobs there is." His support, so casually offered, warmed Eleanor. "I thought so too." "Well," Jacob said, rising from the table, "if you wanted to return to it someday, I wouldn't stand in your way. Though I confess, the ranch could benefit from your education as well. The accounts, correspondence, perhaps even a proper library in that empty room off the study." The idea was appealing, having meaningful work to do, making a contribution to her new home. "I would like that," Eleanor said softly. They stood looking at each other across the table, two people joined in matrimony yet still strangers in many ways. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and possibilities. "I should turn in," Jacob finally said. "Dawn comes early on a ranch. Please make yourself at home. This is your house now, too." "Thank you," Eleanor replied. "Good night, Jacob." "Good night, Eleanor." As she lay in the blue and white bedroom later that night, Eleanor stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with the day's events. This morning, she had awakened as Eleanor Holcomb, eagerly anticipating becoming Mrs. Thomas Blackburn. Now she was Mrs. Jacob West, married to a man she barely knew, living in a house she'd never seen before today. Life, it seemed, had a way of taking unexpected turns. As Eleanor drifted towards sleep, she found herself thinking not of Thomas's betrayal, but of Jacob's steady presence, his quiet strength, and the surprising comfort she had found in his company this evening. It wasn't love, not yet, but perhaps it was the beginning of something that could, in time, become even more meaningful than the romantic notions she had cherished before. The first rays of dawn were filtering through the curtains when Eleanor awakened the next morning, momentarily disoriented by her unfamiliar surroundings. As the events of the previous day came rushing back, she sat up, running a hand through her loose hair. A rooster crowed somewhere outside, followed by the distant lowing of cattle. Eleanor, dressed in one of the simple day dresses her father had packed, a practical blue cotton with white trim, and arranged her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. She had just finished when a knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Caldwell. Instead, Jacob stood in the doorway, already dressed in work clothes, denims, a sturdy shirt, and boots. He looked as though he'd been up for hours. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," Eleanor replied, surprised to find it was true. Despite the tumultuous day, exhaustion had granted her a dreamless sleep. "I've been up since first light," Jacob explained. "There's coffee and breakfast downstairs when you're ready. I need to check on a new calf, but I'd like to show you around the ranch when I return if you're feeling up to it." The consideration in his voice touched Eleanor. "I'd like that very much." Downstairs, Eleanor found Mrs. Caldwell in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with vigorous efficiency. "Good morning, Mrs. West," she said. "Breakfast is keeping warm on the stove, eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Coffee's fresh." "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. It smells wonderful." Eleanor helped herself to the food, carrying her plate to the dining room. As she ate, she gazed out the window at her new home in the full light of day. The view was even more impressive than it had seemed in the twilight. Rolling pastures stretched toward distant hills, dotted with cattle. Closer to the house, she could see a large barn, corrals, a chicken coop, and what appeared to be a kitchen garden. Beyond that was a small orchard of apple and cherry trees, just beginning to bloom in the early spring air. After breakfast, Eleanor explored the house, familiarizing herself with what was now her home. The main floor contained the large front room she had seen last night, a study lined with bookshelves, the dining room, kitchen, and a small room off the kitchen that must have been Mrs. West's sewing room. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms and a bathroom with a large copper tub, a luxury Eleanor hadn't expected. The house was well built and solid, with an understated elegance that spoke of generations of care. Family photographs hung in the hallway stern-faced pioneers in their Sunday best. A young couple she assumed were Jacob's parents, and a boy with serious eyes who must have been Jacob himself. Eleanor was examining a framed map of the ranch when Jacob returned, bringing with him the sense of sunshine and open air. "Ready for that tour?" he asked. Outside, the April day was perfect clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and wildflowers beginning to dot the prairie. Jacob led Eleanor first to the barn, a massive structure that housed the horses, tack room, and storage for winter feed. "This is Sadie," he said, indicating a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "She's yours if you'd like. Good temperament, smooth gait. I thought you might enjoy riding." Eleanor stroked the horse's velvet nose, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "She's beautiful, Jacob. Thank you." They continued on to the chicken coop, where Eleanor collected eggs from nests while Jacob explained which hens were the best layers. At the corrals, he introduced her to the ranch hand's Bill Murphy, an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes, the Santiago brothers, Miguel and Louis, who tipped their hats respectfully, and a young cowhand named Caleb Jenkins, barely out of his teens, who blushed furiously when introduced to the boss's new wife. As they walked toward the cattle pastures, Eleanor was struck by how comfortable Jacob seemed out here, more relaxed and talkative than he had been indoors, pointing out features of the land, explaining the seasonal rhythms of ranch life, introducing her to prize breeding stock. "You love this place," she observed as they paused atop a small rise overlooking a creek where cattle gathered to drink. Jacob looked momentarily surprised, then thoughtful. "I do," he admitted. "There's a satisfaction in working the land and seeing things grow and thrive through your own efforts." He gazed out over the property. "My grandfather homesteaded this land when there was nothing here but prairie grass and promise. My father expanded it during good years. I hope to leave it better than I found it." "A legacy," Eleanor said softly. "Yes." Jacob glanced at her, then away. "I had always hoped to pass it on to children someday." The statement hung in the air between them, laden with implication. Children, a family, the natural progression of marriage that they had yet to discuss. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Jacob, about our arrangement," he held up a hand. "There's no rush, Eleanor. We have time to know each other better first." Relief flooded through her, followed by a curious disappointment she wasn't prepared to examine. "Thank you for understanding." They walked in silence for a time, the spring sun warm on their shoulders. When they reached a small rise crowned by a large cottonwood tree, Jacob stopped. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," he said. "My father brought me here when I was 8 years old, just after we'd survived a drought that nearly ruined us. He told me that as long as this tree stood strong, so would we." He smiled at the memory. "I used to come here to think, to make important decisions." Eleanor looked up at the massive tree, its new leaves shimmering in the sunlight. "It's beautiful, I thought." Jacob hesitated. "I thought perhaps we could plant something here together. A new tree, maybe, or flowering bushes, something to mark this new beginning." The gesture, so simple yet meaningful, touched Eleanor deeply. "I'd like that very much." As they made their way back to the house, Eleanor felt a tentative optimism taking root. This was not the life she had planned, but there was beauty here and purpose, and a man who, while still largely unknown to her, showed thoughtfulness and integrity in his actions. The next several days fell into a rhythm as Eleanor began to settle into ranch life. Her belongings arrived from town, delivered by her father's wagon. The blue bedroom gradually took on her personality as she arranged her books, placed her mother's crocheted doilies on the bedside table, and hung her dresses in the closet. Jacob worked from sunup to sundown, as was the nature of ranch life, but made time each evening to dine with Eleanor and tell her about his day. She, in turn, began to find ways to contribute, organizing the household accounts in a leather-bound ledger, cataloging the books in Jacob's study, and starting a proper inventory of the ranch's equipment and livestock. A week after their wedding, a letter arrived from town instantly recognizable as her former fiancé's handwriting. Eleanor's hands shook as she opened it, Jacob watching silently from across the breakfast table. "Thomas has returned to town," she said after reading the brief note. "He wishes to explain himself and ask my forgiveness." Jacob's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. "What do you want to do?" Eleanor considered the question. A week ago, she might have been desperate for an explanation, for some justification of the public humiliation she had endured. Now she found that the sharp pain had dulled to a distant ache. "Nothing," she said finally, folding the letter and placing it aside. "His explanations come too late." Jacob nodded, relief evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "If you change your mind, I'll accompany you to town." "Thank you, but I don't think that will be necessary." That afternoon, Eleanor asked Mrs. Caldwell to show her the kitchen garden, eager to learn what grew well in the Kansas soil. As they worked side by side, planting tomato seedlings, the older woman gradually opened up, sharing stories of her 50 years in Concordia. "Known Jacob since he was born," she said, tamping soil around a plant. "Always a serious child even before his parents passed, responsible, never gave anyone a moment's worry." "How did his parents die?" Eleanor asked, realizing she knew very little about her husband's history. Mrs. Caldwell's weathered face softened with old sorrow. "Influenza back in '67. Swept through the county like wildfire. Jacob was 20, just back from fighting in the war. One week they were hale and hearty, the next." She shook her head. "He buried them on that rise where the cottonwood stands, then took over the ranch without missing a beat. Never saw him cry, not once, though I know it nearly broke him." Eleanor absorbed this information, adding it to her growing understanding of the quiet, reserved man she had married. A young veteran, barely out of boyhood, suddenly responsible for a large ranch and all its employees. No wonder he valued stability and practicality so highly. "He's a good man, Mrs. West," the housekeeper continued. "Best I've known, deserves happiness." "I'm beginning to see that," Eleanor replied honestly. That evening, as they sat in the front room after dinner, Eleanor with her embroidery, Jacob reading a newspaper from Topeka, she found herself studying him covertly. In repose, his face was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and wind. There was a small scar near his right temple that she hadn't noticed before, and his hands, turning the pages of the newspaper, were strong and capable. "Mrs. Caldwell told me about your parents today," Eleanor said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss." Jacob looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "It was a long time ago, not so very long. 8 years, isn't it?" He nodded, folding the newspaper and setting it aside. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, other times like another lifetime entirely." "She said you fought in the war," a shadow crossed his face. "Union cavalry, enlisted at 17, much to my mother's distress. Saw action at Prairie Grove and a few other skirmishes, nothing heroic." "You were very young," Eleanor observed. "We all were. Too young to understand what we were fighting for, most of us." He stared into the fire for a long moment. Coming home was harder than leaving in some ways. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right anymore. He shook himself as if dispelling unwelcome memories. "Until my parents fell ill. After that, there was too much work to do to dwell on the past." Eleanor set aside her embroidery. "Thank you for telling me. I want to know about your life, Jacob, the things that shaped you." His gaze met hers, searching. "And I want to know about yours, Eleanor, not just the woman I saw in town, but who you truly are." And so they began to talk for the first time since their hasty wedding. Eleanor told him about her childhood as the only daughter of a successful merchant, her love of books and learning that had led her to teaching, her dreams of perhaps starting a proper school in Concordia someday. Jacob listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest. When she hesitantly mentioned her courtship with Thomas, the whirlwind romance that had swept her off her feet with promises of travel and adventure, as the wife of a rising railroad executive, he didn't turn away or grow cold, but nodded with understanding. "He offered an escape from small-town life," Jacob observed. "That's a powerful lure for someone with a curious mind." "Yes," Eleanor admitted, surprised by his insight. though I see now that I was more in love with the idea of the life he promised than with Thomas himself." As the fire burned low, their conversation shifted to lighter topics: favorite books, Dickens for her, surprisingly Thoreau for him, childhood memories, the upcoming spring festival in Concordia. "Will you want to attend?" Jacob asked. "It might be difficult facing everyone so soon." Eleanor considered this. "Perhaps we should, together, show them that we're—" She trailed off, uncertain how to define what they were becoming. "A united front," Jacob suggested with a small smile. "Yes, exactly." When they finally bid each other good night, climbing the stairs side by side to their separate rooms, Eleanor felt something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding, the foundation of what might someday become true companionship, or perhaps even more. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Eleanor was helping Mrs. Caldwell hang laundry on the line when she spotted a carriage coming up the long drive to the ranch house. As it drew closer, she recognized her parents. Jacob emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth, and walked over to stand beside Eleanor as the carriage came to a stop. "Eleanor, darling," her mother called, reaching out her arms even before her husband had helped her down from the carriage. "We've been so worried about you." "Mother, father," Eleanor greeted them, embracing each in turn. "This is a surprise." Her father shook Jacob's hand firmly. "West, hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. Catherine's been beside herself with worry." "Of course not, Mr. Holcomb. You're always welcome," Jacob replied. "Please come inside. Mrs. Caldwell will have refreshments ready." As they settled in the front room, Eleanor noticed her mother's eyes darting around, taking in every detail of the house. She seemed relieved by what she saw: the comfortable furnishings, the signs of prosperity, the cleanliness and order. "We would have come sooner," Catherine Holcomb said, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Caldwell, "but we thought you might need time to adjust. How are things in town?" Eleanor asked, both dreading and needing to know. Her parents exchanged glances. "Mixed," her father finally said. "The initial shock has worn off. Most decent folks are outraged at Thomas's behavior and impressed by Jacob's gallantry." He nodded respectfully toward Jacob. "Others, well, there's always gossip. Thomas has been making quite a spectacle of himself," her mother added disapprovingly. "Drinking at the saloon, telling anyone who'll listen that he made a terrible mistake. He came to the house begging to know where you were. Your father sent him packing." Eleanor felt Jacob tense beside her. "He's welcome to visit Eleanor here if she wishes to see him," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I don't," Eleanor said firmly, touched by Jacob's willingness to allow her that choice. "As I told you, Jacob, his explanations come too late." Relief crossed her parents' faces. "Well, that's settled then," her father said briskly. "Now, West, I've brought those ledgers we discussed. Thought we might go over them while the women catch up." As the men retreated to Jacob's study, Catherine moved to sit closer to her daughter. "Tell me truthfully, Eleanor," she said softly, "are you all right? This marriage, is it?" "It's not what I expected," Eleanor admitted, "but Jacob has been nothing but kind and respectful. He's a good man, Mother, and as a husband, is he?" Catherine flushed delicately. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We're taking things slowly in that regard, getting to know each other first." Her mother's eyebrows rose. "I see," she patted Eleanor's hand. "Perhaps that's wise under the circumstances." She hesitated. "Do you think you could come to care for him in time?" Eleanor glanced toward the study, where she could hear the low murmur of the men's voices. "I think I already do in some ways. It's different than what I felt for Thomas, less dramatic, perhaps, but somehow more substantial." Catherine smiled, seeming genuinely relieved. "That's all a mother can hope for, my dear, a solid foundation upon which to build a life." When her parents departed later that afternoon, Eleanor felt lighter, as if their visit had helped normalize her situation. Her mother had left behind several items from home: Eleanor's favorite quilt, some preserves from last summer, a small box of keepsakes, tangible connections to her old life that somehow made her new one feel more real. That evening after dinner, as Jacob stoked the fire, Eleanor gathered her courage. "Jacob, would you mind if I asked you something personal?" He turned to face her, firelight casting shadows across his features. "Ask anything you like." Have you ever been in love before? The question hung in the air between them. Jacob returned to his chair, considering his answer. Once, he said finally. Her name was Rebecca Miller. Her family had the farm adjoining our land to the east. What happened? The war happened. I enlisted, she promised to wait. By the time I returned, she had married a merchant from Salina. He shrugged, but Eleanor could see the old hurt still lingered. Can't blame her, I came back changed. We all did. I'm sorry, Eleanor said softly. Don't be, life takes its turns. He studied her face. What about you? Was Thomas your first love? Eleanor twisted her hands in her lap. I thought he was. Now I'm not so sure I knew what love was. It all happened so quickly, his courtship, the proposal. Looking back, I wonder if I was more in love with the idea of him than the man himself. And now, Jacob asked, his voice carefully neutral. Now I believe that true love might be quieter than the poets claim, less like lightning and more like. She searched for the right words. More like sunrise, gradual, warming, illuminating. Something shifted in Jacob's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of his lips. That's beautifully said, Eleanor. Their gazes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Jacob cleared his throat. I should check on the new calf before turning in, he said, rising from his chair. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Jacob. As April turned to May, the Kansas prairie exploded into color bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, and prairie verbena carpeting the land in vibrant hues. Ranch life intensified with spring activities, calves being born, fences needing repair after winter damage, crops being planted. Eleanor threw herself into learning everything she could about her new home. She accompanied Jacob on his rounds when possible, asking questions about cattle breeding, grass management, and water resources. In the evenings, she pored over the ranch accounts, identifying ways to increase efficiency and record keeping. Jacob seemed both surprised and pleased by her interest and quick understanding. You have a good head for business, he remarked one evening as they reviewed the quarterly figures together. Better than mine, I suspect. Nonsense, Eleanor replied. You've built this ranch into something impressive. I'm just organizing what's already there. But she couldn't deny the satisfaction she felt in making a meaningful contribution, in being treated as a partner rather than merely a decorative addition to the household. As they worked side by side, Eleanor improving the ranch's administrative systems, while Jacob managed the day-to-day operations, a comfortable companionship developed between them. Conversation flowed more easily. Silences felt companionable rather than awkward, and they began to anticipate each other's needs and preferences. Eleanor found herself watching for Jacob's return when he was out on the range, listening for his footsteps, taking pleasure in preparing his favorite meals with Mrs. Caldwell. For his part, Jacob began bringing her small gifts, wildflowers gathered during his rides, an interesting rock formation, once a nest that had fallen from a tree, perfectly formed and empty of eggs. These tokens, simple as they were, touched Eleanor more deeply than Thomas's expensive presents ever had. They spoke of attention, of noticing what would bring her pleasure, of thinking about her even when they were apart. One evening in mid-May, Jacob returned from town with a wooden crate. Something for you, he said, setting it carefully on the dining table. Eleanor opened it to find nearly 24 books, novels, poetry collections, histories, and scientific texts. Jacob, she breathed, lifting out a volume of Wordsworth. This must have cost a fortune. He shrugged, looking pleased by her reaction. The ranch is doing well. Besides, I noticed you'd read through most of what was already here. Thank you, she said, impulsively reaching for his hand and squeezing it. This is the most thoughtful gift I've ever received. His hand turned in hers, their fingers intertwining briefly before he gently pulled away. There's something else, he said, reaching into his pocket. An invitation to the spring dance in town next Saturday. I thought if you feel ready we might attend. Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't been to town since their wedding day. Partly from practical considerations, the ranch kept them busy, and partly from reluctance to face potential gossip or, worse, encounter Thomas. We don't have to go, Jacob added quickly, seeing her hesitation. It was just a thought. No, Eleanor decided. I think we should, as you said before, show a united front. Jacob smiled one of his rare, full smiles that transformed his serious face. Then we'll go. I should warn you, though I'm a terrible dancer. I'll lead then, Eleanor teased, surprising herself with the flirtatious tone. The night of the spring dance arrived clear and mild, with a full moon illuminating the prairie. Eleanor dressed with care in her best gown, a deep green silk with modest lace trim that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. As she fastened her mother's cameo at her throat, she felt an unexpected flutter of nerves. This would be their first public appearance as a married couple, their debut into Concordia society in their new roles. More significantly, it would be the first time many people had seen Eleanor since she was left at the altar. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. A knock at her bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Jacob entered, and Eleanor's breath caught at the sight of him. Gone were the practical work clothes she had grown accustomed to seeing him in. Instead, he wore a well-cut dark suit, crisp white shirt, and string tie. His usually unruly hair was combed neatly, though that rebellious lock still fell across his forehead. He looked handsome, distinguished, and uncharacteristically nervous. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Eleanor replied, a flush warming her cheeks. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. West." He offered his arm with exaggerated formality, and she took it with a laugh. The tension between them had shifted, charged with a new awareness that Eleanor wasn't quite ready to name. The drive to town was pleasant, the spring evening fragrant with wildflowers and new grass. They spoke of inconsequential things: the condition of the road, the progress of the new calves, the weather forecast for the coming week. As they approached Concordia, however, Eleanor fell silent, her anxiety returning. Jacob seemed to sense her mood. "We don't have to stay long," he said quietly, "just long enough to satisfy propriety. At the first sign you're uncomfortable, we'll leave." His consideration steadied her. "Thank you, Jacob, but I think it's time I held my head high in town again." The dance was being held in the large barn behind the church, the same church where Eleanor had been abandoned and then unexpectedly wed just 6 weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her as Jacob helped her down from the wagon. Inside, the barn had been transformed with lanterns, bunting, and spring flowers. A small band played on a raised platform, and couples were already dancing. Refreshment tables lined one wall, presided over by the Ladies' Aid Society. A hush fell as Eleanor and Jacob entered, followed by a buzz of whispers. Then Eleanor's former teaching colleague, Mary Wilson, hurried forward. "Eleanor, how wonderful to see you," she exclaimed, embracing her warmly. "And Mr. West, congratulations to you both." Her genuine welcome broke the ice. Others came forward to greet them, some sincerely, others with barely concealed curiosity. Eleanor held onto Jacob's arm, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. "Mrs. West, may I have this dance?" He asked formally as the band struck up a waltz. "I'd be delighted, Mr. West," she replied, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. Despite his warning about his dancing abilities, Jacob moved with surprising grace. His hand at her waist was warm and steady, his step sure. As they circled the floor, Eleanor gradually relaxed into his arms, the familiar music and movement calming her nerves. "You're much better than you claimed," she murmured. A smile touched his lips. "My mother insisted I learn. Said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like a newborn calf." The mental image made Eleanor laugh, drawing curious glances from nearby couples. It felt good to laugh, to dance, to be seen publicly with this man who had become increasingly important to her. The evening progressed more pleasantly than Eleanor had dared hope. She danced with her father, with several longtime family friends, and even with young Caleb from the ranch, who stepped on her toes twice but beamed with pride at dancing with the boss's wife. Jacob was similarly in demand, dancing dutifully with several older ladies, and looking distinctly uncomfortable when the mayor's flirtatious daughter claimed him for a lively reel. Throughout it all, his eyes frequently sought Eleanor across the room, checking that she was comfortable, a silent communication developing between them. They were enjoying a brief respite by the refreshment table when a sudden tension in Jacob's posture alerted Eleanor to trouble. She turned to see Thomas Blackburn standing just inside the barn entrance, his gaze fixed directly on her. "Eleanor," Jacob said quietly, "would you like to leave?" She straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from his presence. No, this was bound to happen eventually. Thomas made his way toward them, weaving slightly. He had clearly been drinking. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying in the suddenly quiet corner of the barn, "you look beautiful. I've been trying to see you to explain." "Mr. Blackburn," Jacob said evenly, "this isn't the place." Thomas ignored him, his attention fixed on Eleanor. "I made a terrible mistake," he said, reaching for her hand. "The worst mistake of my life." Eleanor stepped back, avoiding his touch. "Yes, you did, but it's in the past now." "It doesn't have to be," Thomas insisted, desperation in his voice. "The marriage isn't real, everyone knows that. It was just a convenient solution to an awkward situation. We can still—" "That's enough," Jacob interrupted, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable warning. Thomas finally acknowledged him, his expression contemptuous. "This doesn't concern you, West. Everyone knows you only married her out of pity." The accusation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Was that what people believed, that Jacob had acted out of mere pity? Before she could respond, Jacob stepped forward, his face dangerously calm. "Mr. Blackburn, you're speaking to my wife. I suggest you remember that and conduct yourself accordingly." Thomas wavered, seeming to register the steel beneath Jacob's controlled tone. For a tense moment, Eleanor feared the confrontation might escalate into something physical. Then Sheriff Miller appeared at Thomas's elbow. "Everything all right here?" he asked mildly, though his hand rested meaningfully on his belt. "Fine, Sheriff," Jacob replied. "Mr. Blackburn was just leaving." With a last, pleading look at Eleanor, Thomas allowed himself to be led away. As whispers erupted around them, Jacob turned to Eleanor, concern evident in his expression. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "But perhaps we should go." Jacob nodded, placing a protective hand at the small of her back as they made their farewells. The drive home was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the ranch, Eleanor finally spoke. "Is that what everyone believes, that you married me out of pity?" Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. "Does it matter what they believe?" "It matters to me," Eleanor said quietly. He guided the wagon to a stop in front of the house but made no move to descend. In the moonlight, his profile was strong and defined, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't marry you out of pity, Eleanor," he said finally, turning to face her. "I married you because I'd admired you from afar for years, and I recognized an opportunity to make you part of my life. It was selfish, if anything." He paused. "I've never regretted it, not for a moment." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within Eleanor. Without allowing herself to overthink, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, tentative, a question more than a statement. When she pulled back, Jacob's expression was one of wonder and barely restrained hope. "Eleanor," he breathed, her name a question and a prayer. "I don't regret it either," she whispered. "Not anymore." Slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, Jacob raised his hand to cup her cheek. His palm was warm against her skin, slightly rough from outdoor work. His eyes, silver in the moonlight, searched hers for permission. Eleanor nodded almost imperceptibly, and Jacob lowered his mouth to hers. This second kiss was different, deeper, more certain. His lips were gentle but insistent, coaxing a response that Eleanor gave willingly. Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading outward until she felt warmed from within despite the cool night air. When they finally separated, both were breathing unevenly. Jacob rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "We should go inside," he said finally, his voice husky. Eleanor nodded, suddenly shy. Jacob helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. Together they walked into the house, an expectant tension humming between them. In the front hall they paused, the moment weighted with possibility. Eleanor glanced up the stairs toward their separate bedrooms, then back at Jacob, uncertainty evident in her expression. "Nothing needs to change tonight," Jacob said softly, reading her hesitation. "We have time, Eleanor." "All the time we need," relief and disappointment mingled in her response. "Thank you." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Jacob." As Eleanor prepared for bed that night, her mind replayed their kisses, the softness of Jacob's lips, the gentle strength of his hands, the look of wonder in his eyes. For the first time since their hasty wedding, she allowed herself to fully consider what it might mean to be Jacob's wife in every sense. The thought brought not fear, but a warm anticipation. This man who had begun as a stranger was becoming increasingly dear to her, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his careful consideration of her feelings and needs. It wasn't the passionate whirlwind she had experienced with Thomas, but something deeper, more measured, and ultimately more meaningful. A partnership building towards something that might, in time, become the kind of love that endured. The days following the spring dance brought a subtle but significant shift in Jacob and Eleanor's relationship. Though they still maintained separate bedrooms, their interactions took on a new warmth and ease. Jacob would touch her hand when passing the coffee at breakfast, or tuck a strand of hair behind her ear when the wind blew it across her face. Eleanor found herself seeking similar contacts, straightening his collar before he left for the day, letting her fingers linger on his when handing him tools or papers. Each evening, they would sit together in the front room after dinner, sometimes reading in companionable silence, other times discussing the day's events or making plans for the ranch's future. And each night, Jacob would escort Eleanor to her bedroom door, their goodnight kisses growing longer and more intimate as the days passed. One evening in early June, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jacob turned to Eleanor with an unusually tentative expression. "I've been thinking," he said, "about that tree we talked about planting, to mark our new beginning." Eleanor smiled, remembering the conversation from their first days together. "I've been thinking about that too. What kind of tree did you have in mind? An oak, perhaps. They live for generations." He hesitated. "I thought we might plant it tomorrow. It's been exactly 2 months since our wedding day." The fact that he had remembered the date touched Eleanor deeply. "That's a lovely idea, Jacob." The next morning dawned clear and warm. After breakfast, Jacob loaded a young oak sapling into the wagon, along with shovels, water barrels, and a picnic lunch prepared by Mrs. Caldwell. Together, they rode to the rise crowned by the old cottonwood tree, Jacob's special place on the ranch, now becoming Eleanor's as well. They worked side by side, digging a hole large enough for the sapling's root ball, carefully positioning the young tree and packing soil around it. When the oak was securely planted, they stepped back to admire their work. "It doesn't look like much now," Jacob observed, "but give it 50 years and it'll be magnificent." 50 years, Eleanor repeated softly. The time span stretched before her, full of possibilities, seasons changing, the ranch evolving, children growing, she and Jacob aging together beneath the spreading branches of this tree they had planted with their own hands. Jacob seemed to follow her thoughts. "I'd like to believe we'll be here to see it," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Together." Eleanor turned to him, suddenly certain of what she wanted, what they both wanted. "I believe we will be." The look that passed between them needed no words. Jacob reached for her, drawing her into his arms with a tenderness that made her heart ache. His kiss was different this time, deeper, more urgent, a prelude rather than a good night. Eleanor responded in kind, her arms winding around his neck, her body pressing closer to his. The solid strength of him against her felt right, necessary, as if a piece that had been missing had finally clicked into place. When they broke apart, both breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to say something." She waited, her heart thundering in her chest. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "Not because of circumstances or convenience, but because of who you are, your strength, your kindness, your quick mind." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "I don't expect you to feel the same way yet, but I wanted you to know." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, not of sorrow, but of a joy so intense it bordered on pain. Jacob, she said, her voice wavering, I think I've been falling in love with you too. Slowly, steadily, in ways I didn't fully recognize until now. The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie, radiant, warming, full of promise. He kissed her again, a kiss that spoke of future mornings and shared dreams, of a love building toward something enduring. When they finally spread the picnic blanket beneath the old cottonwood, the mood between them had shifted irrevocably. As they shared Mrs. Caldwell's fried chicken and apple pie, their conversation turned to plans for the future expansions to the ranch house, improvements to the cattle stock, the possibility of children someday. I've been thinking of converting the room next to the study into a proper library, Jacob said, watching Eleanor's face light up at the suggestion. Those books I bought you need a better home than my haphazard shelves. I'd love that, Eleanor replied. And perhaps when we're ready, one of the empty bedrooms could become a nursery. The idea hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Jacob reached for her hand, his expression solemn yet tender. Eleanor, he said quietly, there's something else I've been meaning to ask you. She looked at him questioningly. Would you consider moving your things into the master bedroom, making it our room, not just mine? A flush colored his cheekbones above his beard. I understand if you're not ready. There's no rush, Eleanor silenced him with a gentle finger to his lips. Yes, she said simply. I'm ready, Jacob. I want to be your wife in every sense. The journey back to the ranch that afternoon was charged with anticipation. They spoke little, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts and desires. When they arrived home, Jacob saw to the horses while Eleanor went inside, her heart racing with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Mrs. Caldwell, with her usual perceptiveness, took one look at Eleanor's flushed face and sparkling eyes and announced that she would be spending the evening at her cottage. Lamb stew's in the pot for dinner, she said with a knowing smile. Just needs heating up. Eleanor thanked her, grateful for the woman's tact and understanding. Then she made her way upstairs to begin moving her personal items into what would now be their shared bedroom. The master bedroom was masculine but comfortable, dominated by a large four-poster bed with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and brown. Eleanor had been in the room before, but always briefly, always conscious of it being Jacob's private space. Now, as she placed her hairbrush on the dresser beside his razor, hung her dresses in the closet next to his shirts, she felt a profound rightness in the mingling of their possessions. She was arranging her books on an empty shelf when Jacob appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of tenderness and barely restrained desire. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? He asked, his voice husky. I meant what I said. We can wait as long as you need. Eleanor crossed the room to him, her heart full. I'm sure, Jacob, I want to be your wife, truly your wife. That night, in the soft glow of lamplight, Eleanor and Jacob consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that transformed what had begun as a marriage of convenience into something profound and true. There was awkwardness at first, as is natural between new lovers, but it quickly gave way to a deep connection that left them both breathless with wonder. Afterward, as Eleanor lay in the circle of Jacob's arms, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she felt a sense of completion she had never known before. This was where she belonged, not with Thomas and his grand plans and empty promises, but here, with this quiet, honorable man who had offered his hand when she needed it most and his heart when she was ready to receive it. I love you, Jacob West, she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her, and I love you, Eleanor West, more than I have words to express. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the West Ranch flourished under the joint stewardship of Jacob and Eleanor. Their partnership, which had begun as a practical arrangement, deepened into a bond of mutual respect, friendship, and love that impressed everyone who knew them. Eleanor expanded her role on the ranch, not only managing the accounts and correspondence, but also implementing new breeding programs based on research she conducted through agricultural journals and letters to experts at the state university. Jacob, recognizing her natural aptitude for business, increasingly consulted her on major decisions affecting the ranch's future. Together, they weathered the challenges that came their way: a summer drought that threatened the hay crop, an early autumn storm that damaged fences and outbuildings, a dispute with a neighboring rancher over water rights. Through it all, they stood united, their different strengths complementing each other in ways that made them more effective together than either could have been alone. Their private life was equally harmonious. The passion that had ignited on the day they planted the oak sapling continued to burn steadily, warming their nights and lending a special glow to their days. They developed the small rituals that bind a marriage: coffee shared in the early morning before the day's work began, notes left for each other when they were apart, private jokes that needed only a word or glance to recall. As Christmas approached, bringing with it the first anniversary of their unconventional courtship, Eleanor began to suspect a change in her condition. Her monthly courses, always regular, had not appeared for 2 months, and certain foods that she had previously enjoyed now turned her stomach. She kept her suspicions to herself, wanting to be certain before sharing such momentous news with Jacob. The week before Christmas, Dr. Morgan made his regular visit to the ranch to check on one of the ranch hands who had broken his arm in a fall. After the examination, Eleanor asked him privately to confirm what she already believed to be true. "Well, Mrs. West," the doctor said with a smile after a brief examination, "it appears you'll be welcoming a new addition to the ranch come summer. Congratulations." That evening, as she and Jacob sat before the fire after dinner, Eleanor handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "It's a bit early for Christmas gifts, isn't it?" he asked, smiling as he accepted it. "This one couldn't wait," Eleanor replied, her heart racing with excitement. Jacob unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a tiny pair of knitted booties. He stared at them uncomprehendingly for a moment, then his gaze shot to Eleanor's face, hope and wonder dawning in his eyes. "Eleanor." "Are you?" She nodded, tears of joy filling her eyes. Dr. Morgan confirmed it today. The baby should arrive in late June or early July. Jacob set the booties carefully aside and pulled Eleanor into his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had already answered the question. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he replied, drawing back to look into her face. "Eleanor, you've given me more than I ever dreamed possible: your trust, your partnership, your love, and now a child. I'm beyond happy. I'm blessed beyond measure." As they sat together before the fire, making plans for the nursery and discussing names, Eleanor reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. The humiliation that had seemed unbearable on that April day in the church had led, ultimately, to the greatest joy she had ever known. Thomas Blackburn's cruel abandonment, intended to hurt her, had instead opened the door to a deeper, truer love than she could have imagined. Jacob's impulsive offer, a hand extended in her moment of greatest need, had grown into a marriage so fulfilling that she could now look back on that day with something approaching gratitude. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, warmed by firelight and the love they had built together, Jacob and Eleanor West looked toward the future with hearts full of hope and the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together just as they had from the moment he had offered his hand instead. On a bright summer morning in late June 1876, Eleanor West gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named William Jacob West, after both their fathers. As Jacob held his son for the first time, his face alight with wonder and pride, Eleanor knew that the unexpected path her life had taken had led her exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years later, on the rise where the old cottonwood stood guard beside a now thriving young oak, Jacob and Eleanor watched their son and his 2-year-old sister, Catherine, play in the summer sunshine. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations, expanding to nearly 1,000 acres. The house had grown as well, with additions including the promised library and a dedicated schoolroom where Eleanor taught not only their children but also those of the ranch hands. Did you ever imagine it would turn out this way? Eleanor asked, leaning against her husband's solid strength as his arm circled her waist. That day in the church, when everything seemed to be falling apart, Jacob shook his head, pressing a kiss to her temple. Never. But I hoped from the moment I offered my hand that someday we might find our way to this. Eleanor turned in his embrace, raising her face to his. I'm glad you had the courage to step forward that day, to offer a different path when mine had disappeared. Best decision I ever made, Jacob replied, his blue eyes, crinkled now at the corners from years of squinting into the Kansas sun, filled with a love that still took her breath away. Offering my hand to you, Eleanor Holcomb, in front of the whole town of Concordia. West, she corrected with a smile. Eleanor West, and don't you forget it. As their lips met in a kiss still charged with the passion that had sustained them through these years of building a life together. Their children's laughter rang out across the prairie, the sweetest music Eleanor had ever heard. The perfect accompaniment to a love story that had begun in the most unexpected way and grown into something more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. The oak sapling they had planted on that pivotal day 5 years ago now stood nearly 15 feet tall, its branches reaching skyward, its roots growing deeper with each passing season. Like their love, it had taken hold in rocky soil, weathered storms and droughts, and emerged stronger for the challenges it had faced. In the years to come, that oak would continue to grow, providing shade for family picnics, a backdrop for photographs marking milestones, a climbing challenge for adventurous children and later grandchildren. And through it all, Jacob and Eleanor West would stand together beneath its spreading branches, their love a testament to the truth that sometimes life's greatest blessings arise from its most painful disappointments, and that a hand offered in kindness can lead to a lifetime of happiness.